Here's something that sounds ridiculous until you think about it. The phone in your pocket probably uses navigation technology updated this year. The airliner carrying 300 people through bad weather to a major international airport may still rely, at the most critical moments, on systems whose roots go back to the 1940s and 1950s, and which became aviation's backbone in the 1960s. In an age of satellites and real-time tracking, that feels almost absurd. Why would one of the most safety-obsessed industries on Earth still trust what looks, from the outside, like museum technology? And the answer is not that aviation is lazy. It is not that airlines do not want anything better. Modern aviation already tried to move beyond those old systems. Governments spent decades promising a satellite-based future. Pilots embraced it because, on a good day, satellite navigation is cleaner, more flexible, and more capable than the old radio beacons on the ground. But then, the real world got involved. Interference got worse. Spoofing got worse. Jamming got worse. And suddenly, the most advanced navigation network in history started to look a lot less invincible than everyone had assumed. To understand why the old stuff survived, you have to go back to what it actually was. One of the most important systems was VOR, short for VHF omnidirectional range. Development began in 1937. The first VOR station became operational in 1946. By the 1950s, the network was spreading fast, and by the 1960s, it had effectively become the highway system of the sky. A VOR station on the ground sends out radials in every direction. Tune the right frequency, center the needle, and a pilot can tell exactly what course leads to or from that station. It was not glamorous, but it was dependable. It turned invisible airspace into something structured, repeatable, and safe. And VOR was everywhere. Before the FAA began thinning the network under its minimum operational network program, the United States had 957 federally owned VORs, plus about 100 non-federal stations. That is more than 1,000 ground-based reference points spread across the country. For generations of pilots, this was navigation. Airways were built around it. Procedures were built around it. Training was built around it. If you wanted to know where an airplane was going, there was a good chance the answer involved following one VOR radial to the next across the continent. Then there is ILS, the Instrument Landing System, which matters for a different reason. If VOR helped aircraft move across countries and oceans, ILS helped them come home. Tests of ILS began in the United States in 1929. After the creation of ICAO, it was selected as the first International Standard Precision Approach System and published in Annex 10 in 1950. Then in March 1964, a commercial airliner carried out the first fully automatic landing using ILS at Bedford in the United Kingdom. A system standardized in 1950 and proven for Autoland in the mid-1960s is still guiding airliners down through cloud today. That is daily aviation reality. Now, if you were redesigning the system from scratch, you probably would not put radio transmitters all over the ground and ask airplanes to home in on them like it is the Cold War. You would use satellites. And that is exactly what aviation tried to do. GPS and wider satellite-based navigation promised something the old systems could never match. Instead of hopping between fixed beacons, aircraft could fly direct. Routes could be more efficient. Approaches could be designed around terrain and noise restrictions instead of antenna locations. In the United States, that vision was called NextGen. Launched in 2003, NextGen was supposed to transform American air traffic control from a ground-based, radar-centered system into one built around satellite navigation, digital communications, and smarter automation. On paper, it sounded like the future finally arriving. But by 2025, after roughly 2 decades and about $36 billion in spending, the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General said the FAA had delivered only around 16% of the total expected benefits. Some improvements were real, absolutely. But the revolution was slower, patchier, and much less complete than advertised. And that matters because Aviation did not replace the old system with a flawless new one. It layered new technology on top of old technology while discovering that the new layer had its own weaknesses. Satellite navigation is brilliant when the signal is available and trusted. The problem is that GPS is fragile in a way VOR and ILS are not. The signal reaching an aircraft from orbit is extraordinarily weak by the time it gets there. That makes it vulnerable to accidental interference and deliberate attack. You cannot casually spoof a VOR. You cannot easily impersonate an ILS. But GPS can be jammed, and even worse, it can be lied to. That is where the story turns from engineering to geopolitics. In 2024, the GPS Spoofing Workgroup, led by OPS Group, reported a 500% increase in spoofing incidents. It said an average of about 1,500 flights a day were being spoofed, compared with roughly 300 a day earlier in the year. In just 1 month, from July 15th to August 15th, 2024, about 41,000 flights experienced spoofing. Over the Baltics, aircraft reported around 46,000 instances of satellite navigation problems between August 2023 and the end of March 2024, according to figures cited by ESA and widely reported in Europe. This is not theoretical anymore. It is not some future cybersecurity concern. It is already happening to real crews in real airspace. And spoofing is nastier than simple jamming. Jamming takes the signal away. Spoofing gives you a false one. It tells the airplane and the crew, with total confidence, that they are somewhere they are not. That is why so many pilots and safety specialists are suddenly speaking about conventional radio navigation. Not as obsolete equipment, but as resilience. The old gear does not have to be better than GPS at everything. It just has to still work when GPS becomes untrustworthy. That is a completely different job, and a much more important one than people appreciated when satellite navigation looked unstoppable. This is also why the FAA never fully pulled the plug on VOR. Instead, it created the VOR Minimum Operational Network, or MON. The plan was not to preserve every beacon forever. It was to keep enough of them alive that if GPS goes away, aircraft can still navigate to a safe landing. As of a 2025 FAA presentation, 200 VORs had already been discontinued, with 594 planned for retention. The system is designed so that aircraft operating above 5,000 feet above ground level should be able to navigate to an airport with a conventional approach within 100 nautical miles, even during a GPS outage. That is not nostalgia. That is contingency planning written into the National Airspace System. And here is the irony. For years, VOR and ILS were treated like outdated infrastructure waiting to be replaced by something smarter. But as the satellite era matured, they turned out to be exactly what modern aviation needed most: independent backups. A VOR station doesn't care if someone is spoofing satellites over a conflict zone. An ILS localizer does not care if space weather is disrupting signals from orbit. Ground-based systems can fail, of course, but they fail differently, and that difference is everything in aviation. Safety does not come from believing one system is perfect. It comes from making sure different systems can cover for one another when one of them stops behaving. There is another reason the old technology lingers, and it is less dramatic but just as important. Aviation moves slowly because it is supposed to. If you are changing the navigation architecture for millions of flights a year, you are not updating an app. You are changing procedures, certification standards, training, airport equipment, airline maintenance programs, simulator profiles, and emergency checklists. Every improvement has to prove not just that it works, but that it works reliably in bad weather, equipment failures, and mixed fleets spread across the world. That is one reason ILS survived repeated attempts to replace it, including systems like MLS and newer concepts like GBAS. The alternatives may be capable, even superior in some ways, but capability alone is not enough. Aviation demands standardization and trust. And trust takes a very long time to earn. That is what people outside aviation sometimes miss. In this industry, old does not automatically mean bad. Sometimes old means the failure modes are well understood. Old means thousands of crews have seen the system behave in every kind of weather. Old means maintenance teams, regulators, and investigators know exactly what to look for when something goes wrong. There is enormous value in that. The technology that looks primitive from the outside may actually be carrying decades of hard-won operational knowledge that newer systems have not yet accumulated. So when people ask why planes still use 1960s navigation technology, the real answer is that they do not use it instead of modern systems. They use it alongside them. GPS changed aviation. Satellite navigation is now central to how aircraft route, approach, and manage fuel efficiently. But the older radio systems remain because aviation learned a lesson it keeps relearning. The newest technology is not automatically the most resilient technology. When everything works, satellites are extraordinary. When things get weird, pilots still want a needle, a frequency, and a signal coming from a known point on the ground. And maybe that is the part of the story worth remembering. The persistence of VOR and ILS is not proof that aviation failed to modernize. It is proof that aviation understands the difference between innovation and dependence. The industry did embrace the future. It just refused to bet everything on one version of it. Aviation history shows that systems do not become obsolete the moment something newer appears. They become obsolete when the replacement proves it can be trusted in every condition that matters. And for all the brilliance of satellite navigation, the old 1960s era backbone has not quite lost that argument yet.